سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. All praise is due to Allah. We seek His help and we seek His forgiveness. We seek refuge with Allah from the evils of our souls and from our bad deeds. Whomever Allah guides, no one can misguide. And whomever Allah leaves astray, no one can guide. And I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is His messenger. ثُمَّ مَا بَعْدْ. Dear brothers and sisters, in the Hijri calendar, on the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, is marks the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, or as known al-Mawlid al-Nabawi. And scholars had different opinions about that day. People until this day have different opinions of whether to celebrate it, whether to kind of leave it alone, and they went to a lot of discussions regarding what should be done or not done during that day. And if you look at all the different schools of thought and all the different scholars, their reasoning behind their arguments was for the love of the Prophet ﷺ. So each person, when he was trying to decide whether we should celebrate it or not, it was because of the love of the Prophet ﷺ, and the love for Islam, and the love of the religion that they practice. So that's one common thing that we see during this day. So let's take that point and then see how we can capitalize on it and see how we can build on that point that we all love the Prophet ﷺ. And when you think about it, every time you mention his name, the person in front of you will tell you alayhi salatu wassalam. Or every time something happens, people will kind of have their emotion moved because it touches or affects what the Prophet ﷺ did or said. So when we think about it, why do we need to argue, or why do we need to sit there and debate whether we should celebrate the day or not, or whether we should do it or not? Let's focus on how are we treating ourselves and how we're dealing with others when it comes to the way the Prophet ﷺ did. And before we get to, we need to celebrate the day or not, let's compare on how much are we following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And there's no better way of following or knowing what to do and what not to do other than looking at some of the hadith and some of the things that he said and did, and compare the things that we did or we still do. So we're going to look at one of the hadith that's narrated by Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu. He said, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تحاسدوا ولا تناجشوا ولا تباغضوا ولا تدابروا ولا يبع بعضكم على بيع بعض وكونوا عباد الله إخوانا المسلم أخو المسلم لا يظلمه ولا يخذله ولا يحقره التقوى ها هنا ويشير إلى صدره 3 مرات بحسب امرئ من الشر أن يحقر أخاه المسلم كل المسلم على المسلم حرام دمه وماله وعرضه. Now, in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentions a lot of things that we should not do, and gives us pointers on the things that we should follow and the things that we do. So the first thing he said, وَلَا تَحَاسَدُوا. And we look at the hasad. And the scholars talked about the hasad and said, the hasad that we shouldn't do is the one when you look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given somebody and wishing that ni'mah or that thing to be gone. Now, having that envy kind of has different levels. So if I look at somebody and see them with wealth, if I look at them and say, mashallah, they have a good wealth, I wish I could have more wealth and work for it, then the scholars said that that's okay, because you're not wishing for their wealth to go away. You're happy for them to have that wealth, but yet, you want to be as good or more than they do. But the bad envy, the hasad that we shouldn't do, the one that Prophet ﷺ is telling us to avoid, is when we look at somebody and we wish what they have to be gone, for whatever reason. Or we wish that, I wish they don't have it, but I do. And then he said, وَلَا تَنَاجَشُوا. Now, an-najash is when we're trying to increase the price of a product when we don't have the intention of buying it, to either A, make it beneficial for us, or benefit our friend. And this can be seen in multiple places, but one of the common forms that a lot of us know is eBay. When you think about it, a lot of people are bidding on stuff online, and if your friend is putting an item for sale, you just go on there and just keep increasing the price. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us that this is wrong. We cannot do this. And then وَلَا تَبَاغَضُوا. And at tabaghud, when you're really trying to think of a clear definition of tabaghud, it's hard to find because the tabaghud comes from the inside. When you have baghda towards somebody, it's like you kind of have that feeling that you really don't like him, or you really hate them, or you really kind of have that issue with them for whatever reason. So when we need to stop that, when we need to prevent ourselves from having that tabaghud, we have to think of how can we do this? How can we stop ourselves from having that negative feeling towards somebody who we shouldn't have? And the one thing we can think of is just having that love relationship between you and the person in front of you. And this can be carried in multiple ways. If you have issues with the person, and instead of increasing that and saying, yes, I don't like that person, or I hate that person because they did this, think about the good things that comes out of that person. So if one negative comes out, try to think of 3 or 4 positives that comes out of that person to change that. And we'll talk about why do we need to have that love instead of the hate later on. And it says, and then the Prophet ﷺ says, وَلَا تَدَابَرُوا. And a tadabur can be taken in 2 different ways: the physical tadabur, or the one when you're doing it with your heart or with your emotions. And a tadabur is when kind of 2 people are going opposites. So if you're physically, if one person is facing this way, then you look the other way. So you're giving each other's backs. And then when we look at the tadabur in the heart, that's when one person decides one thing, and then you just decide to go the opposite. If they say let's go east, just out of just for the sake of argument, or for the sake of getting into fight, you say no, we're going to go west. If they say let's do this, you just go the opposite for no legit reason. And then says وَلَا يَبَعْ بَعْضُكُمْ عَلَى بَيْعِ بَعْضٍ. And the scholars explain this when he says, do not over or undersell or oversell somebody who just sold something else. So if I go and buy an item, or if I go and sell an item, we shouldn't go around and offer that item for less if the period of return has expired. Because this all what this will do is just will increase the hate between Muslims. Because if I go and sell something for $100, and then somebody comes behind me and says, I'll give you that same item he gave you for $90, well, that person is going to feel like, oh, he got cheated. When all what you're doing is you're just trying to undercut my price. So, and the scholars said that, having things like this, has really fine print of what can and cannot be done. So if we are in the business of, selling and buying, we have to look at the guidelines of what is and what is not allowed. what can be done and what can be done. Because at the end of the day, we are the ones responsible for our actions. And then he says, after the Prophet ﷺ gives those guidelines, he said, وَكُونُوا عِبَادَ اللَّهِ إِخْوَانًا. And he gives us the definition. He said, be brothers, be worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but at the same time be brothers. And he follows it, he says, Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim. He said, a Muslim is the brother or the sister of another Muslim. Now think about, why does he say that? Why does he put that definition at the end of these things? Because then he follows it with also a different things to do. So the Prophet ﷺ says, don't do this, and don't do this, and don't do this, and don't do that. And he said, deal with each other as if you're brothers. And then he said, لا يظلم, does not commit injustice against his fellow brother. And in the Hadith Qudsi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يا عبادي إني حرمت الظلم على نفسي. I made, injustice forbidden on myself. So I made it forbidden on you as well. So the Prophet ﷺ is making sure that this statement is clear in our heads, that do not commit injustice against your fellow brother or sister. وَلَا يَخْذِلُهُ. If somebody comes to you for help, and you know you can help them, then do it. And sometimes we don't have to wait for them to come and ask us for that help. If we know somebody that needs it, why should we put them in a situation to come and ask us? Because sometimes, yes, we want people to come and ask us for help, we want people to come and seek our help, but at the same time, if that person is in distress, or if that person is going through hardship, they already have enough trouble on their minds, let alone come and ask for people to support them. And this comes part of the brotherly or the sisterly love. Notice, the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Muslimu akhul Muslim. He already defined that we are brothers and sisters. If you see your brother, from your father and your mother, your blood brother or sister, if you see him in distress, you don't wait for them to come and seek and ask your help. You go help them out right away. So the Prophet already gave us the guidelines that deal with each other as brothers and sisters. So وَلَا يَخْذُلُهُ, so don't wait. Now, if he asked you, then it's like almost an obligation that we have to go and help. Because just because they're not our blood brother or sister doesn't mean that we don't have to help them. And then he said, وَلَا يَحْقِرُ. And when you look at istihqar, it's really kind of looking at somebody who doesn't have money, have less of a job than you do, somebody in a less social or economic position than you are, and then make him feel that way. Make yourself feel superior and make him feel inferior. And these are things that the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, do not do. These things will create the division between the different Muslims. And then he talks about the taqwa and defines the location of the taqwa, where that righteousness comes from. And he points to his heart. Not once, but 3 times. He said, at-taqwa ha-huna. Because the heart is the source of your actions. Because we can do something with our hands. We can say something with our tongues. But unless it's coming from the source with the right intentions, then the end point is not useful for us. And then the Prophet ﷺ ends the hadith with 3 things. He said, كل المسلم على المسلم حرام. ماله ودمه وعرضه. He said the Muslim is forbidden to touch or to kind of pass the line of these three things. And the first thing is demo. Killing him, family member, any of that stuff. He said that's forbidden. وَمَالُ, and then his money. You don't go take somebody's money or steal their money or do whatever with their money and then consider yourself their fellow brother or sister. And وَعَرْضُ. And the scholars define the عرض as anything that's considered ghiba. Then you have touched the عرض, you have touched their red line, if you will. So anything that person doesn't like to be touched or to be spoken of, then it is considered al-'ard. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, these are the red lines that you don't cross when it comes to your fellow brother or sister. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم أرجو الجنة. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله سيدنا محمد صلوات الله وسلامه عليه ثم أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, this hadith, we can spend hours talking about this hadith and talking about the details of each point that this hadith brings. But what I want to point out here is that before we decide on to celebrate or not celebrate the birth of the Prophet ﷺ, whether we should get into an argument of whether it's legit or not, whether it's right or wrong, let's see how much of his sunnah are we following. How much of the way he lived his life are we following? And subhanAllah, this is one hadith that touched on 6 or 7 different points. There are different hadith that talk about just wasting a lot of things, and being wasteful when it comes to water, or being wasteful when it comes to your money, or being wasteful when it comes to resources. And pick one thing, and then say, okay, today, or on the day of the Prophet ﷺ, is going to be the day where I revisit all of my sunnah. And I say, how many of them have I done in the past year? And how many of them I'm going to pick up for the following year? How many of them am I going to, improve on? And how many of them, I feel like I am solid, now I can move on. And the Prophet ﷺ gave us things to do pretty much throughout the whole day. Before we go to sleep, when we wake up, before we leave the house, all these adhkar, all the ad'iyah, all the prayers that we can, that can keep us in connection with the Prophet ﷺ and with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the guidance and to give us the strength to follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ.